Hi, I'm Steve Alcorn. I've spent 25 years teaching online. I've got 29 books published, over 100,000 students across my courses, and I run a business called Writing Academy that keeps me busy every single day. I started using an AI assistant, a real one, persistent, always available, connected to my actual work, and it changed how I run my business. I want to be clear about what I mean by that. I'm not talking about asking ChatGPT to write a poem or summarize an article. I'm talking about an assistant that knows my business, knows my preferences, handles my email, posts to my social media accounts, compiles my monthly newsletter, manages my Amazon ad campaigns, and files a status report every night so I can see what we've gotten done. It took a while to get there. I made mistakes along the way, some of them pretty embarrassing. There was the time my assistant accidentally sent a welcome email to my entire mailing list of 2,800 people instead of just the 3 new subscribers it was supposed to reach. Nobody got hurt, but I learned something important that day about guardrails. That's what this course is about. The real, practical, sometimes messy process of working with an AI assistant to get actual work done. I'm going to share exactly how I use mine, what works, what doesn't, what surprised me, what I wish I'd known from the start. You don't need to be technical. I'm not. I spent my engineering career building theme park technology, not writing code. I came to AI because I had too much work and not enough time, and I needed help. If you can explain a task to a human assistant, you can explain it to an AI assistant. The skills are the same. By the end of this course, you'll understand how AI assistants actually work, not the marketing version, the real version. You'll know how to teach one your preferences, build its knowledge over time, and to delegate real tasks with confidence. You'll know what to automate, what to keep under your control. You'll have a clear picture of what this costs, what can go wrong, and how to manage both. I've been documenting my experience every single day. Status reports, notes, lessons learned. Everything I'm going to share with you comes from that record. Real tasks, real results, real mistakes. Let's get started. I want to tell you who I had in mind when I built this course because it matters. If you're in the right audience, everything here will click. If you're not, I'd rather save you the time. This course is for people who run things. You own a small business, freelance, create content, manage projects. Whatever the specifics, you've got more work than hours. You've probably heard that AI can help, but most of what you've seen online feels like hype. Flashy demos of things you'd never actually do. Prompt engineering tutorials that feel like learning a programming language. You're skeptical. Good. You should be. I was skeptical too. I'd been teaching online for over 2 decades, running Writing Academy, managing a dozen different platforms and tools. When people told me AI would change everything, I nodded politely and went back to work. I had courses to maintain, students to support, books to promote, websites to update, emails to answer. I didn't have time to learn a new toy. What changed my mind wasn't a demo, it was drowning in work. I manage email for a help address that gets customer inquiries. I run a monthly newsletter that goes to about 2,800 subscribers. I maintain multiple WordPress sites. I handle social media for 2 different brands. I publish books on Amazon and run ad campaigns for them. I produce video courses for Udemy and Skillshare. Every one of those tasks has subtasks, and every subtask has details I need to get right. I'm one person. I don't have a marketing team or a content department, so when I finally tried working with a persistent AI assistant, one that could learn my preferences and actually take action, it stuck, because I wasn't experimenting. I was desperate. If that sounds familiar, you're in the right place. Here's who this course probably isn't for. If you're a software engineer looking to integrate AI into your development workflow, there are better courses for that. If you want to learn prompt engineering as a skill unto itself, same thing. And if you're looking for a tool recommendation, just tell me which app to download. I'm going to disappoint you because the specific tools matter less than the approach. What I'm teaching is the working relationship. How to think about delegation when your employee is an AI. How to build trust gradually, starting with zero-risk tasks and working your way up. I come at this as a business owner, not a technologist. My engineering career was in themed entertainment, designing ride control systems for theme parks. I can think logically about systems, but I haven't written production code in decades. When I describe how I work with my assistant, I'm describing it from the perspective of someone who needs results, not someone who enjoys tinkering. The examples in this course are real. They come from months of documented daily use. When I tell you about a mistake, it's one I actually made. When I describe a workflow, it's one I actually run. You don't need to match my setup exactly. The principles transfer, regardless of which AI platform you use, but you do need to be willing to invest some time up front in teaching your assistant who you are and how you work. That upfront investment is the thing most people skip, and it's the reason most people give up. They sign up for an AI tool, ask it a few generic questions, get mediocre answers, and conclude the whole thing is overhyped. What they missed is the setup. Telling the assistant about your business, your preferences, your workflow. That's where the compounding value starts. Teach it something once and you never have to correct it again. Each preference you set, each procedure you define makes tomorrow a little easier than today. I'll walk you through that process, step by step, starting with the very first conversation and building from there. One more thing, I'm not going to pretend AI is magic. It makes mistakes. It costs real money to run. It sometimes does things you didn't ask for. I'll cover all of that honestly, because understanding the limitations is just as important as understanding the capabilities. Maybe more so. If you've got real work to do and you want a practical guide to getting an AI assistant to help with it without the hype, without the jargon, without the breathless promises, stick around. Let me clear something up right at the start, because the phrase AI assistant gets thrown around to describe very different things. Siri is an AI assistant, so is Alexa. You can ask them to set a timer or play a song and they'll do it. But try asking Siri to draft a response to a customer complaint using the same tone as your last 3 emails, and you'll get a blank stare, or worse, a web search result. ChatGPT is closer. You can have a real conversation. Ask it to write something, analyze something, brainstorm something. It's genuinely useful, but each conversation starts fresh. It doesn't know your business. It doesn't know what happened yesterday. The kind of assistant I'm talking about in this course is different in 3 important ways. It's persistent. It knows things about you because you've told it, and it remembers those things across conversations. It can take actions, send emails, edit websites, post to social media, manage files, and it follows procedures you've taught it consistently without needing to be reminded. Think of it like the difference between calling a random temp agency every morning versus having the same assistant show up to your office every day. My assistant knows that I run Writing Academy, that my help email gets customer inquiries, that my newsletter goes to about 2,800 subscribers, that I maintain WordPress sites for multiple brands. It knows the credentials for my email platform, my ad accounts, my course hosting. It knows my writing style, right down to specific words I don't want used and formatting rules I care about. When I forward an email without any comment, my assistant knows that means file this for the newsletter digest. When I forward one with a comment, it knows that means take action on this. I didn't program these behaviors. I told it once, and it remembered. How does this actually work? At its core, every AI assistant runs on a large language model, the same technology behind ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, and others. These models are remarkably good at understanding language, generating text, and following instructions. But they have a fundamental limitation. They start every session with a blank slate. The persistence, the part that makes an assistant feel like it knows you, comes from a layer built on top of the model. Files that store facts about you and your business, rules that define how the assistant should behave, daily notes that track what's in progress, skills that package specific procedures so the assistant follows them consistently. My assistant has a fax file with names, relationships, project details, and credentials. It has a rules file with behavioral instructions. When Steve forwards an email without comment, treat it as digest material. It has daily notes that capture what happened each day. And it has about 20 specialized skills for things like email handling, social media posting, newsletter compilation, and WordPress editing. Every morning, when my assistant starts up, it reads these files. That's how it remembers. The memory is real in every practical sense, even though the underlying mechanism is just reading documents. The action part, actually doing things in the world, comes from tools the assistant can use. Web browsing, file management, API, calls to services like email platforms and social media. When my assistant posts to Facebook, it's running a script that talks to Facebook's system. When it edits a WordPress page, it's using WordPress's API. The AI decides what to do. The tools let it actually do it. You don't need to understand the technical details. What matters is the practical reality. You can have an assistant that knows your business, follows your preferences, and takes real action on your behalf. It gets better over time as you teach it more, and it works for you specifically, shaped to your needs, your workflow, your way of doing things. The specific platform you use matters less than the principles behind it. Whether you're using ChatGPT with custom instructions, Claude with project files, or a dedicated assistant framework, the core ideas are the same. Give it memory, give it context, give it the ability to act, and teach it your preferences. That's what we're building toward in this course. There's one concept you need to understand before anything else about working with an AI assistant, and it's the conversation window. Get this right and everything else makes sense. Miss it and you'll be frustrated every day. Here's the simplest way I can explain it. Imagine you're having a conversation in a room. Everything said in that room, by you, by the assistant, by anyone, gets written on the walls. The AI can see all of it. It can reference something you said an hour ago because it's right there on the wall. But the room has a fixed size. Once the walls are full, the oldest writing starts getting erased to make room for new text. And when you leave the room and come back the next day, the walls are blank. That's the conversation window. Why should you care? Because the conversation window affects everything about how you work with your assistant, how much context it can hold, how long your sessions can last, when information starts getting lost, and why certain tasks need to be structured differently than others. When you start a conversation with your assistant in the morning, the window is mostly empty. The assistant loads its memory files, facts about you, behavioral rules, daily notes from yesterday. That takes up some of the window right away. Then every message you send, every response the assistant generates, every document it reads, every web page it looks up, all of that fills the window further. By the end of a busy day, the window might be nearly full. When that happens, the system has to make room. It compresses or removes the oldest parts of the conversation. The assistant might lose the details of something you discussed that morning. I've seen this happen. I'll reference a task we worked on hours earlier, and the assistant won't recall the specifics. The conversation simply fell off the edge of the window. Nothing malfunctioned. The space just ran out. This is why external memory matters so much. The conversation window is temporary. It lasts for one session. Files on disk are permanent. When my assistant writes something important to its daily notes, like Steve approved the newsletter draft or the WordPress SSL certificate expires next week, that information survives past the current conversation. Tomorrow, when the assistant starts fresh, it reads those notes and picks up where we left off. Think of it like this. The conversation window is your assistant's short-term memory. The files on disk are its long-term memory. Just like a human, it needs both. The practical implication? You should care about what goes into the window and when. If you dump a 50-page document into the conversation, that's a big chunk of window space consumed. Sometimes that's necessary, but if you only need information from pages 3 and 7, you're better off pointing the assistant to those specific sections. Likewise, if your assistant is doing a complex task that generates a lot of text, researching a topic, drafting a long document, analyzing data, the conversation window fills up faster. Long tasks might need to be broken into stages, with important results saved to files between stages. Here's a rough sense of scale. 1,000,000 tokens sounds enormous, but a busy day of back and forth work, web research, and document analysis can chew through it faster than you'd expect. Every web page the assistant reads, every file it opens, every tool result it processes, all of that enters the window. The solution is simple. Save as you go. My assistant writes key decisions and findings to its daily notes throughout the day. If the window compresses later, the important stuff is already preserved. It's like taking meeting minutes. You probably won't read them back, but you're glad they exist when you need them. You don't need to micromanage the conversation window. Just understand the basic principle. Your assistant's working memory is large but finite. It resets between sessions, and anything important should get written to permanent storage. Build that habit early, and the conversation window takes care of itself. I've been working with an AI assistant every day for months. I've given it hundreds of tasks across every part of my business. Some of those tasks it handles better than I would. Others it botches so badly I wonder why I bothered. The pattern isn't random. Once you see it, you'll save yourself a lot of frustration. Let me start with what AI does well. Research. When I need to understand something, a new advertising platform changes to an email services API. How a WordPress plugin works, my assistant can scan documentation, read web pages, and synthesize an answer in minutes. Drafting. First drafts of blog posts, newsletter content, course descriptions, email responses, social media posts. My assistant produces all of these. I taught it my writing style through a detailed guide, banned phrases, formatting rules, tone preferences. The result is first drafts that need light editing instead of complete rewrites. Repetitive tasks. Anything you do the same way every time is a perfect fit. Processing incoming emails, formatting data, posting to social media on a schedule. Data work. Organizing information, building spreadsheets, analyzing trends. My assistant runs weekly reports on my Amazon ad performance and flags anything that needs attention. Scheduling and coordination. Morning reports, nightly summaries, monitoring websites, anything that runs on a clock. An AI handles well because it doesn't forget and it doesn't get bored. Now here's where things fall apart. Judgment calls. When a customer sends an ambiguous email, my assistant can draft a response, but it can't always tell whether the person is annoyed, confused, or just being brief. Tone is hard. Context that comes from years of experience with your customer base, that's something AI doesn't have. Creative vision. My assistant can write a blog post that follows all my style rules. It can't decide what the blog should be about. The generative part works fine. The evaluative part doesn't. When a task requires taste, knowing that something is good, not just correct, you're on your own. Knowing when to stop. My assistant will cheerfully work on a task long past the point of diminishing returns if I don't set boundaries. I once had a helper task get stuck in a loop, burning through 2.6 million tokens before I caught it. That's like leaving the meter running on a taxi that's driving in circles. Now every delegated task has a timeout. Knowing what it doesn't know. AI rarely says I'm not sure about this unless you've specifically trained it to. My assistant states things with complete confidence, whether it looked up the answer or made one up. I'll give you one more example that captures the split perfectly. My assistant compiles my monthly newsletter. It gathers candidate articles, arranges them into sections, renders the HTML, and sends me a preview. All of that is process work, defined steps, clear inputs and outputs. The assistant does it well. But deciding which articles make the cut, whether the tone feels right, whether the opening paragraph will actually make someone keep reading, that's on me. The assistant assembled it. I shaped it. Once you see the pattern, it's obvious. Tasks with clear instructions, defined processes, and verifiable outputs, AI excels. Tasks requiring judgment, taste, lived experience, or knowing when to ask for help, keep those for yourself. The goal is to hand over the right things so you have time and energy for the work that actually needs you. Here's something that will happen to you, probably in your first week. You'll ask your assistant a factual question. It'll give you a confident, detailed answer, and it'll be completely wrong. The first time it happened to me, I didn't even catch it. I asked about a specific document, and my assistant described its contents in detail, structure, key points, even specific passages. The problem? The document didn't exist. The assistant had invented the whole thing. And it sounded so authoritative that I almost acted on it. This is called confabulation. Sometimes people call it hallucination, and it's the single biggest risk in working with AI. The model generates text that sounds right because it's optimized to sound right. It doesn't have a separate mechanism that checks whether what it's saying is true. There's no internal fact checker raising a hand and saying, wait, I made that up. It happens most often with specific facts. Names, dates, URLs, statistics, quotes, historical details. The more specific the claim, the more likely it is to be fabricated. So how do you deal with this? First, verify anything factual before you act on it. If my assistant tells me a link works, I check the link. If it quotes a statistic, I look for the source. If it describes what's in a document, I read the document. Second, teach your assistant to flag uncertainty. My assistant has a rule. When uncertain, say so plainly, I think. Probably. I'm not sure about this. It doesn't eliminate confabulation, but it reduces the cases where the assistant presents a guess as a fact. Third, be especially careful in domains where you're not an expert. If your assistant gets something wrong about a topic you know well, you'll catch it instantly. The dangerous mistakes happen when the assistant sounds authoritative about something you can't easily verify. Fourth, watch for the telltale signs. Responses that are suspiciously detailed about something obscure. Specific citations you didn't ask for. Round numbers that feel too clean. And answers that come instantly for questions that should require research. The good news is that confabulation tends to cluster around certain types of tasks. Factual claims about the external world are risky. Following instructions you've given, analyzing documents you've provided, drafting text in your voice, those are much more reliable because the assistant is working with information you supplied, not generating facts from memory. Here's my practical approach. For anything the assistant generates from its own knowledge, facts, references, technical details, I verify before I trust. For anything it generates based on my inputs, drafts, formatting, analysis of my own data, I trust but review. Build verification into your workflow early, before you've had your first embarrassing mistake. Because that mistake is coming. It's a matter of when, not if. I'll share one habit that served me well. Before I act on any factual claim from my assistant, I ask myself, where did this information come from? If the answer is it looked it up just now from a source I can check, fine. If the answer is it generated this from its training data, I verify independently. That single question has saved me from more mistakes than any other practice I've developed. Every relationship starts somewhere. With a human assistant, it's the interview. With an AI assistant, it's the first conversation, and most people get it completely wrong. They open a chat window and type something like, summarize this article or write me an email. That's not starting a relationship, that's barking an order at a stranger. No wonder the results feel generic. Here's what I did instead. The very first thing I told my assistant was who I am. Not my life story, just the basics that would shape every interaction we'd have going forward. My name, where I live, what I do for a living, that I run an online school called Writing Academy, that I've written 29 books, and that I'm retired from a career in theme park engineering. The next thing I shared was how I like to work. I'm a morning person, but flexible. I work all day, every day, not because I have to, but because I enjoy it. That single piece of context prevents my assistant from doing something annoying, telling me it's late and suggesting I get some rest. I actually had to spell that out explicitly. I also told it my communication preferences. I'm direct. Skip the pleasantries. Don't start responses with great question, or I'd be happy to help. Just help. All of this went into what I call a personality file, a document that my assistant reads at the start of every session. Think of it as a cheat sheet about you. It doesn't need to be long. Mine started at maybe 200 words and grew over time. Here's what to include in yours. Start with the basics: your name, location, time zone, and what you do. Then add your business context, what you sell or create, who your customers are, what tools and platforms you use. Then add your work style, when you work, how you communicate, what annoys you. That last category matters more than you'd think. The things that annoy you are the things you'll have to correct over and over if you don't mention them up front. Don't overthink the format. Some people want to write a polished document. Mine started as a messy list: name, location, time zone, what I do, what I hate, communication preferences. I cleaned it up later. The structure doesn't matter nearly as much as the content. You don't have to get this perfect on day one. My personality file has been edited dozens of times. I add things whenever I notice a pattern, whenever I find myself correcting the same behavior twice. One more thing about that first conversation. Set the tone early by giving your assistant a real task, even a small one. After I'd shared my background, I asked it to draft a short bio based on what I'd told it. The result showed me immediately what it understood and what it had missed. It got the facts right, but made me sound like a press release. So I corrected the tone, and that correction became part of the personality file too. Your first conversation is the foundation. Spend 15 minutes on it. Tell your assistant who you are, how you work, and what you expect. You're not programming a machine. You're briefing a new colleague on their first day. The more context you give up front, the less time you'll spend correcting bad assumptions later. And if something feels off in that first interaction, say so. Your assistant learns from corrections, but only if you make them. After the first conversation, you'll have a working relationship with your assistant. It knows who you are and what you do, but it doesn't yet know how you like things done. That part comes through preferences, and teaching them well is one of the most valuable things you can do. Let me give you some examples from my own setup. I told my assistant, always present times in my local time zone, not UTC. Never use the word straightforward in anything you write for me. Don't use deep dive either. Use contractions, write don't instead of do not. Keep paragraphs short, 1 to 3 sentences max. Each of those preferences is tiny, trivial even, but they compound. Every time my assistant writes something that already matches my style, that's a correction I didn't have to make. Over weeks and months, those saved corrections add up to hours. More importantly, the output starts feeling like mine instead of feeling like generic AI writing. Here's how I think about preferences. They fall into a few categories. Communication style is the big one. How formal or casual do you want your assistant to be? I want mine to sound like a sharp human, not a press release. I want opinions. If my assistant thinks an approach is better, I want to hear it. Formatting preferences matter more than you'd expect. I care about how dashes are used. I want semicolons occasionally. I want bold text used sparingly. These are the difference between output that feels polished and output that feels machine-generated. Then there are work preferences. I told my assistant that when I forward an email without any comment, that means it's just background reading. When I forward an email with a comment, that's an instruction to do something. That single rule eliminated a whole category of confusion. Tool preferences matter too. I told my assistant which platforms I use, how I access them, and what I expect from each one. WordPress for websites, Bravo for email marketing, Teachable for courses, Dropbox for file sharing. The most important thing about preferences is timing. Teach them when they come up naturally. Don't try to write an exhaustive preference document on day one. Instead, correct in the moment. When your assistant formats something wrong, say always do it this way instead. When it uses a phrase you hate, say never use that phrase. Then make sure the correction gets saved somewhere permanent. That brings up an important point. Preferences only stick if they're written down. If you tell your assistant something in conversation, it'll remember for the rest of that session, but the next session, gone. Don't be afraid to have strong preferences. Some people feel silly telling an AI never use that word. It feels like micromanaging, but your assistant doesn't have feelings to hurt, and it won't think you're being picky. It'll just follow the rule, every time, forever. I have a whole list of banned phrases at this point, words my assistant is never allowed to use. Deep dive, straightforward, game changer. I'd be happy to help. Every one of those bands exists because I got annoyed enough to make a rule. Your list will be different, but I promise you'll have one. Here's something that surprises most people about AI assistants. They don't actually remember anything. Every conversation starts from zero. When you close a session and open a new one, your assistant has no idea what you talked about yesterday. It doesn't remember the project you're working on, the email it drafted for you, or the preference you taught it 20 minutes ago. This sounds like a fatal flaw, and honestly, it would be if you didn't work around it. The workaround is structured memory, and building it is one of the most important things you'll do in your first week. I built a simple memory system with 4 types of files. Let me walk through each one. First, the facts file. This is where I store everything my assistant needs to know about my world, who people are. Linda is my wife. Danny is my daughter. What projects exist and their current status, what tools I use and how to access them. Think of it as a reference manual. Things in this file change slowly. Second, the rules file. This is where behavioral rules live. When X happens, do Y. When Steve forwards an email without comment, treat it as background reading. When a newsletter is ready, compile it but never send it without explicit approval. Third, daily notes. This is the handover file. What happened today? What's in progress? What I need to pick up tomorrow. It's like the notes a shift worker leaves for the next person. My assistant writes a status report every night, capturing what was accomplished, what's pending, and what needs attention. The next morning, it reads yesterday's notes and picks up where things left off. Fourth, skills. These came later, and I'll cover them in depth in Section 5. For now, just know that skills are packaged procedures for specific tasks, like a recipe card for how to send the newsletter or how to post to social media. Here's the key insight. These files are the memory. There's nothing else. If something isn't written in one of these files, my assistant doesn't know it next session. Period. That sounds restrictive, but it's actually liberating once you embrace it. You know exactly what your assistant knows because you can read the same files it reads. There's no hidden state. No mystery about why it forgot something. If it forgot, the information wasn't written down. The fix is always the same. Write it down. When you're starting out, you don't need all 4 types. Start with just a facts file and a rules file. The facts file covers who you are, what your business does, who the key people are, and what tools you use. The rules file covers your behavioral preferences, the things you taught it in the previous lesson, plus any procedures for recurring tasks. Keep these files concise. A common mistake is writing a 10-page document full of context just in case. Pack the facts file with dense, useful information and leave out the narrative. Build the memory gradually. After each work session, ask yourself, did I tell my assistant something today that it'll need to know tomorrow? If yes, make sure it's in a file. Did I establish a new rule or procedure? Put it in the rules file. Did we work on something that's still in progress? Put it in the daily notes. This takes discipline at first, but after a week or 2, it becomes second nature, like saving your work before closing a document. One more thing worth mentioning, your memory files will evolve. My facts file has been rewritten 3 or 4 times as I figured out what actually matters versus what I thought would matter. Entire sections got cut because they were never relevant. Others grew because they came up constantly. Don't aim for perfection on day 1. Aim for useful. The files will tell you what they need to become if you pay attention to what you keep looking up, repeating, or correcting. You've set up the relationship. Your assistant knows who you are, how you work, and has a basic memory system. Now it's time to do something real. Pick your first task carefully. You want something concrete, useful, and low risk. Low risk means if the result is wrong, nothing bad happens. You just try again. This rules out anything involving sending emails to customers, publishing content, or spending money. Save those for later. Good first tasks. Summarize a long document. Draft an internal email you'll review before sending. Organize messy notes into a clean format. Research a topic and give you a summary with sources. Write a first draft of something you plan to write anyway. I'll walk you through an actual first task to show you what good delegation looks like. Early on, I asked my assistant to draft a course description for one of my writing classes. I didn't just say, write a course description. Here's roughly what I said. Draft a 200-word course description for my mystery writing class on Udemy. The audience is aspiring novelists who've never written a mystery before. The tone should be encouraging, but not cheesy. Mention that the course covers plot structure, clue placement, and red herrings. Keep it conversational. That request took me maybe 30 seconds to write. Notice what I included. The format, 200 words. The subject, mystery writing on Udemy. The audience, aspiring novelists, beginners. The tone, encouraging, not cheesy. The key topics, plot structure, clues, red herrings. And the style, conversational. I didn't write a whole brief. I just gave enough detail for a good first attempt. The result came back in about 10 seconds. Was it perfect? No. It hit the right length and covered the topics, but the opening line was generic and the tone was a little too salesy. So I said, the opening line is bland. Start with something more specific about the mystery genre. And dial back the sales language. This should feel like a recommendation from a friend, not an ad. The second version was much closer. I made 2 small edits by hand, changed a word choice, and cut a sentence, and it was done. Total time from start to finish, maybe 3 minutes. Writing that description from scratch would have taken me 15 or 20. That's the pattern you'll repeat over and over. Give clear instructions, review the result, provide specific feedback, accept or refine. The first attempt is rarely the final one, and that's fine. The value isn't in getting a perfect first draft. It's in getting a solid starting point that's 80% of the way there. Here are some things to watch for on your first real task. If the result completely misses the mark, the problem is usually your instructions, not the AI. Vague instructions produce vague results. If you said, write something about my business and got generic fluff, that's on you. Be more specific next time. If the result is close but the tone is off, that's a preference you should capture. Tell your assistant what was wrong and add it to your rules file. Marketing copy should sound like a recommendation from a friend, not an advertisement. Now it knows. If the result contains facts you didn't provide, verify them. AI will confidently fill in details it doesn't actually know. If the result is great, say so. Positive feedback helps calibrate. When you tell your assistant that's exactly the right tone, it reinforces what worked. After your first task, do a few more. Try different types of work. Draft an email, summarize a long article, write a social media post, organize your to-do list. Each task teaches you something about how your assistant works and where its strengths and weaknesses are. You'll start to notice patterns. It's excellent at reformatting and restructuring existing content. It writes solid first drafts that need human editing. It's fast at research, but sometimes wrong about specifics. It follows formatting instructions precisely. It struggles with tasks that require your personal judgment or taste. These patterns will shape how you work together going forward. Don't worry if the first few tasks feel clumsy. They will. You'll give instructions that are too vague or too detailed. You'll forget to mention something obvious. You'll review the output and realize you should have specified the tone or the audience. That's all normal. Every interaction teaches you something about how to work with your assistant, and by the end of the first week, you'll have a feel for the rhythm. Start with something small. Build from there. You'll be surprised how quickly that rhythm develops and how natural it starts to feel. The single biggest factor in whether your AI assistant produces good work is the quality of your instructions, not the AI model, not the settings, not the prompt engineering tricks you read about online, just plain, clear instructions. Here's a bad instruction. Write me a blog post. Here's a good one. Write a 400-word blog post about common beginner mistakes in mystery writing. The audience is aspiring novelists visiting my writing school website. Use a friendly, direct tone. Include 3 specific mistakes with brief explanations of how to fix each one. The difference is obvious when you see them side by side, but in practice, most people default to the vague version. They think the AI should just know what they want. It doesn't. It has no idea what length you want, who the audience is, what tone fits your brand, or what the post should actually say. So it guesses. And generic instructions produce generic output. Good instructions share a few characteristics. They specify the format. How long should it be? What structure? A 200-word summary is a different task than a 1,000-word article. A numbered list is different from flowing prose. Tell your assistant what shape the output should take. They define the audience. Who's going to read this? Writing for my students, aspiring novelists, mostly beginners, produces very different results than writing for industry peers. Your assistant can't pick the right level of detail or vocabulary without knowing who it's talking to. They set the tone. Formal or casual, technical or accessible, enthusiastic or restrained. I tell my assistant to write like a sharp human, not a press release. That single instruction eliminates most of the generic corporate-sounding language that AI defaults to. They include the key points. If you want the blog post to cover 3 specific topics, list them. Don't make your assistant guess what you care about. The more specific your content guidance, the less editing you'll do afterward. Here's where people go wrong, though. They confuse good instructions with long instructions. You don't need to write a 500-word brief for a 400-word blog post. My course description example from the last lesson was about 50 words of instruction. That was enough because each piece of information did real work: length, topic, audience, tone, key content, style. Think of instructions as constraints, not scripts. You're defining the boundaries of what you want, and your assistant fills in the rest. Too few constraints and you get generic mush. Too many constraints and you might as well write it yourself. The sweet spot is 3 to 6 specific pieces of guidance for most tasks. There's also a timing element. Front-load the important stuff. If the tone matters most, say that first. If the length is critical, lead with it. AI assistants process instructions sequentially, and the stuff at the top tends to get more attention than the stuff at the bottom. One technique I've found valuable: give examples when the instruction is hard to describe. Write in a tone like this paragraph is sometimes more effective than trying to define the tone in the abstract. If you have a blog post you love, share it and say, match this style. Concrete examples communicate what adjectives sometimes can't. Another technique: tell your assistant what not to do when you've seen it go wrong before. Don't use marketing buzzwords. Don't start with a rhetorical question. Don't list more than 5 items. Negative constraints are surprisingly effective because they cut off the AI's most common bad habits. Your instructions will get better over time, and that's expected. Nobody gives perfect instructions from day one. You learn what your assistant needs by seeing what it does with what you gave it. When the output misses the mark, that's feedback about your instructions, not just about the AI. Adjust, try again, and capture the pattern for next time. The goal isn't to become an expert at writing prompts. The goal is to communicate clearly, the same skill that makes you effective with human colleagues. If you can explain what you want to a reasonably smart person, you can get good results from an AI assistant. The only difference is that AI needs you to say the things a human colleague would infer from context. It doesn't know your business, your audience, or your taste unless you tell it. So tell it, be specific, keep it concise, and watch the quality of the output jump. I keep a short checklist in my head now for any task I hand off. Did I specify the format, the audience, the tone, the key content? If I've covered those 4 things, even briefly, the results are almost always usable. Miss even one, and I'm more likely to need a do-over. It takes 10 extra seconds to be specific. It saves minutes of revision. That trade-off is worth making every time. Here's something that took me a while to learn. The first response from your assistant is almost never the final product, and that's not a problem. That's the process. Most people treat AI like a vending machine. Put in the request, get out the result, done. If the result isn't great, they assume AI doesn't work for that task. But the real value of an AI assistant shows up in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th exchanges, the back and forth where you shape the output into something genuinely useful. Let me give you a real example. My assistant writes first drafts of marketing content for my writing courses. A typical exchange goes like this. I ask for a blog post about common mistakes beginner novelists make. The first draft comes back solid, good structure, relevant points, right length. But the opening paragraph is flat, and there's a section in the middle that's too generic. So I say, the opening needs a hook. Start with a specific example of a mistake, not a general statement about mistakes being common. And the section about dialogue, give me a concrete before and after example instead of just describing the problem abstractly. The second version is noticeably better. The opening pulls you in. The dialogue section has a real example. But now I notice the closing paragraph is trying too hard. It's doing that thing where every sentence builds to an inspirational crescendo. So I say, cut the last paragraph down to 2 sentences. Just summarize and point them to the course. No need for a motivational speech. Third version, done. That whole exchange took maybe 5 minutes. The alternative, writing it myself from scratch, would have been 30. The back and forth works because of something important. You don't have to start over. When you give feedback on a draft, your assistant modifies what it already has. It doesn't throw everything away and begin again. This means each iteration is faster than the last. The first draft takes 10 seconds. The revision takes 5. The final polish takes 3. Here's how to give good feedback during the back and forth. Be specific about what's wrong. I don't like it doesn't help. The tone is too formal does. The second paragraph is too long does. Tell your assistant what you want instead, not just what you don't want. This is too formal is useful. This is too formal, make it sound like I'm talking to a friend is better. Don't overcorrect. If the draft is 80% right, say what needs to change and leave the rest alone. Trust the parts that work. Focus your feedback on the parts that don't. Know when to accept good enough. Perfection is the enemy of done. If a blog post is clear, accurate, and sounds like me, it doesn't need a 6th revision to polish 1 sentence. One technique I use often, instead of asking for a full rewrite, I'll edit a small section myself and then ask the assistant to match that style for the rest. I've rewritten the first paragraph, adjust the rest to match this tone. That's faster than describing the tone in the abstract, and lets my assistant pattern match from a concrete example. There's another benefit to the back and forth that's easy to miss. It helps you clarify your own thinking. Sometimes I start with a vague sense of what I want, and the first draft shows me what I don't want. That's valuable. The draft is a mirror. I look at it and think, no, the emphasis should be on this part, not that part. I couldn't have articulated that before seeing a draft. The back and forth isn't just editing, it's thinking out loud with a very fast collaborator. The back and forth is where an AI assistant stops being a novelty and starts being a genuine partner. The first draft gets you started, the conversation gets you finished, and over time, as your assistant learns your preferences and you learn how to give better feedback. The first drafts get closer to what you want. The back and forth gets shorter, but it never disappears entirely, and it shouldn't. Your judgment is the ingredient that makes the output yours. An AI assistant can do a lot, but that doesn't mean it should do everything. One of the most valuable skills you'll develop is knowing when to hand something off and when to just do it yourself. I use what I call the 5-minute rule. If explaining the task to my assistant would take longer than doing it myself, I just do it. This sounds obvious, but people violate it constantly when they first get an AI assistant. They're so excited about delegating that they spend 10 minutes crafting the perfect instruction for a task that would have taken 3 minutes by hand. Here's a simple example. I need to change a heading on one of my WordPress pages. I could tell my assistant which page, which heading, and what to change it to. Or I could just log in and change it. For a single small edit, doing it myself is faster, but if I need to update headings across 12 pages, that's a delegation task. Tasks worth delegating usually share some combination of these traits. They take more than a few minutes, they involve repetitive steps, they require research you don't already have, or they produce a first draft you'll edit anyway. Tasks not worth delegating are usually quick, one-off, and easier to show than to describe. Let me give you some real examples. I delegate drafting blog posts, compiling newsletters, writing course descriptions, formatting documents, researching competitors, analyzing ad campaigns, managing contact lists, generating social media posts, and drafting responses to customer emails. I don't delegate. Deciding what to write about, choosing which photo looks best, making business strategy decisions, handling sensitive personal emails, or anything that requires my taste and judgment as the deciding factor. There's a category between these two that's worth talking about. Tasks where AI produces different results, but not necessarily better results. Creative work often falls here. I can ask my assistant to write a catchy title for a blog post, and it'll generate 10 options quickly. Some will be clever, but none will have my specific sensibility about what resonates with my particular audience. For titles, I've found it's often faster to brainstorm myself. For body copy, delegation works much better because the structure and research save me real time. Another pattern I've noticed: delegation works best for the middle of a workflow, not the beginning or end. The beginning requires your vision. What are we making? For whom? And why? The end requires your judgment. Is this good enough to publish? But the middle, the drafting, the formatting, the research, the assembly, that's where AI shines. It fills in the space between your idea and your finished product. There's a cost to unnecessary delegation that people overlook: context switching. Every time you stop what you're doing to write instructions for your assistant, you're breaking your own flow. For complex work where you're deep in thought, that interruption can cost more than the time the assistant would have saved. The 5-minute rule has a corollary I think of as the explanation tax. Some tasks are easy to do but hard to explain. When the explanation tax is high, do it yourself. On the other hand, some tasks are hard to do but easy to explain. Research the top 10 competitors in online writing education and summarize their pricing, course count, and unique selling points in a table. That would take me an hour. It takes my assistant 5 minutes. Over time, you'll develop an intuition for this. As you and your assistant work together longer, the delegation boundary shifts. Tasks that weren't worth delegating at first become worth delegating once your assistant knows your preferences, your tools, and your style. The goal is to use your assistant for work where it genuinely saves you time or produces better results than you'd get alone, and to do the rest yourself without guilt. So far, we've talked about individual tasks: write this, draft that, research this. But some of the most valuable work your assistant can do involves projects that span hours or even days, multi-step work with dependencies, decision points, and moving parts. Managing long projects with an AI assistant requires a different approach than one-off tasks. The key principle: plan first, then execute, and check in at decision points, not constantly. Here's how I handle a multi-step project. Let's say I need to produce the monthly newsletter for my writing school. That involves collecting article candidates, selecting the best ones, writing an intro, assembling everything into an HTML email template, previewing it, getting my approval, and sending it to about 2,800 subscribers. I don't say do the newsletter and walk away, and I don't micromanage every step. I do something in between. First, I ask my assistant for a plan. The newsletter is due next week. Walk me through the steps and what you need from me. The plan comes back with a clear sequence. Each step is explicit, and the points where I need to weigh in are clearly marked. I review the plan, adjust if needed, and say, go. My assistant works through the steps, and I don't hear from it again until it reaches a decision point. Between checkpoints, I'm doing other things. Hovering over routine execution wastes my time without improving the result. The critical insight is knowing where the decision points are. Decision points are moments where the project could go in different directions depending on my judgment. Which articles to include in the newsletter is a decision point. How to format the HTML is not. Whether to mention a specific product in a blog post is a decision point. What font size to use in the email template is not. Let your assistant handle everything between decision points without interruption. Check in at the decisions, approve, and move on. For projects that span multiple days, your memory system becomes essential. Remember, your assistant starts fresh each session. A long project only works if the state is captured somewhere your assistant can read it tomorrow. I typically ask my assistant to save a progress summary at the end of each work session. What's done, what's next, and any decisions that are pending. The next morning, it reads that summary and picks up right where it left off. There's a temptation with long projects to front-load all the instructions. Here are 47 things I need you to do. Don't do this. Break it into phases and give detailed instructions for each phase as you reach it. Your assistant doesn't need to know the details of Step 12 while it's working on Step 3. I've also learned to set explicit boundaries on long-running tasks. A helper task got stuck in a loop during a batch processing job. It burned through 2.6 million tokens before I caught it. Now every delegated task has a timeout and a scope limit. One more technique. For complex projects, ask your assistant to flag anything unexpected. If you encounter something that doesn't match what we discussed, stop and ask me before proceeding. This turns your assistant into a smart executor that handles the routine work but escalates surprises. Long projects are where an AI assistant goes from useful to transformative. A single task might save you 10 minutes. A well-managed project can save you a full day. The secret is structure. Plan before executing, check in at decisions, and trust the routine work to run without you watching. Your assistant handles the steps. You make the calls that matter. Here's how most people work with an AI assistant at first. They need something done. They explain it. The assistant does it. Next week, they need the same thing done again. They explain it again from scratch, maybe slightly differently this time, maybe forgetting a detail they mentioned before. The first time I asked my assistant to process an incoming email, I gave it detailed instructions. Here's who it's from, here's what this type of email usually means, here's how I want you to respond, here's the tone I prefer. It took 3 or 4 messages to get the response right. The assistant did a good job, task done. Then another email came in, same type, and I found myself typing the same instructions all over again. That's the moment where most people stay stuck. They treat every interaction as a fresh conversation, and the assistant treats it the same way, because it literally starts each session with no memory of what came before. The fix sounds obvious once you hear it. Write things down. When I caught myself explaining the same email procedure for the 3rd time, I stopped and said, "Take what I just told you and turn it into a permanent reference I can give you next time." The assistant created a clean document, a procedure that captured every detail, the sender rules, the tone guidelines, the exceptions. Next time a similar email came in, I didn't explain anything. The assistant read the reference and handled it. That single change saved me more time than anything else I'd tried with the assistant. Think about your own work. You probably have dozens of recurring tasks that follow the same pattern each time. Maybe you format invoices a certain way. Maybe you respond to customer inquiries with a specific structure. Maybe you compile a report every week with data from 3 different sources. Each of those tasks lives in your head as implicit knowledge. You don't think about the steps because you've done them hundreds of times, but your assistant doesn't have that history. Every time it encounters the task cold, it's guessing. The solution is turning implicit knowledge into explicit knowledge. Write it down so your assistant can follow it. Here's how I approach it now. The first time I do something with my assistant, I expect it to be a conversation, back and forth corrections, adjustments. That's normal. But if I think there's any chance I'll want this done again, I end that conversation with a simple request. Save this as a procedure. The document doesn't need to be elaborate. A few paragraphs describing what the task is, how to handle common variations, and what the finished product should look like. The key is capturing the decisions, the things I corrected during our back and forth. Those corrections represent my preferences, and they're exactly the details that get lost between sessions. Over time, this collection of procedures became the backbone of how my assistant works. There's a compounding effect that surprised me. Each new procedure makes the next one easier to create because the assistant already understands the pattern, and each procedure makes the assistant more capable. After a few weeks, I had maybe 15 documented procedures. After a few months, closer to 50. The people who get the most value from AI assistants aren't the ones who write the cleverest prompts. They're the ones who build the best documentation. Here's a practical tip. At the end of any task where you did significant back and forth, ask your assistant what it learned. Have it summarize the key decisions and preferences. Then save that summary somewhere permanent. You're capturing knowledge while it's fresh, and you'll never have to teach that lesson again. The goal is simple. Never explain the same thing twice. If you find yourself repeating instructions, that's a signal. Write it down, save it where your assistant can find it, and move on to the next problem. As I built up those procedures over time, I ran into a problem. I had a growing collection of documents, some about email handling, some about how to write in my voice, some about website maintenance, some about newsletter production. My assistant would load them all at the start of every session, whether it needed them or not. That worked fine when I had 10 documents. When I hit 30 or 40, it became wasteful. My assistant was reading thousands of words of instructions about newsletter compilation when all I needed was help with a WordPress edit. And when I started delegating tasks to helper agents, those helpers couldn't access all my reference files. They'd get a task with no context and do a mediocre job. The solution was packaging related procedures into self-contained bundles. I call these skills. A skill is everything an assistant needs to handle one specific type of work, all in one place. Let me give you a concrete example. My assistant handles incoming email for my business. The email skill covers which email addresses to monitor, how to categorize different types of messages, which ones to respond to automatically, which ones to flag for me, what tone to use in responses, and how to handle specific senders. Before I bundled this into a skill, the assistant would sometimes respond to a server notification in a customer-friendly tone or treat a customer inquiry like a system alert. The information was scattered, and the connections between related procedures were missing. Here's another example. I publish content across multiple platforms, blog posts, social media, newsletters. My writing voice skill captures everything about how I write. The phrases I never use, and there are a lot of them, the formatting rules, the tone guidelines. Any task that involves writing for my audience loads that skill automatically. The key insight is that a skill should be self-contained. If you hand it to a brand new assistant with zero context about you, it should have enough information to do that specific job well. That's the test. Building a skill doesn't have to be complicated. Start with the procedures you already have. Group the ones that relate to the same type of work. Add any context that connects them, the why behind the rules, the common edge cases, the things that went wrong before you documented the fix. My rule of thumb: if a task has more than 3 steps, involves external systems, or requires judgment calls, it's probably a skill. A one-step preference like always respond in my time zone belongs in a general reference file. But handle incoming customer emails involves categorization, routing, response drafting, and follow-up tracking. That's a skill. The practical benefit shows up most clearly when you start delegating work. When I ask my assistant to compile my monthly newsletter, it loads the newsletter skill and has everything it needs. When I ask it to draft a blog post, it loads the writing voice skill. The assistant pulls in exactly the knowledge it needs for the job at hand. Nothing more, nothing less. Over time, I've built up about 20 skills covering the major areas of my business. Each one represents hours of back and forth compressed into a reliable reference. When something changes, a new platform, a new workflow, a fix for something that went wrong, I update the relevant skill. The next time that work comes up, the improvement is automatic. Think of skills as training manuals for specific jobs. You wouldn't hand a new employee your entire company handbook and say, figure it out. You'd give them the manual for their role. Same principle applies to your AI assistant. Skills tell your assistant how to do things. Reference files tell it what it needs to know. There's an important difference. A skill is a procedure, step-by-step instructions for handling a specific type of work. A reference file is information, facts, people, context, history. Your assistant needs both to be genuinely useful. Let me walk you through the reference files I maintain and why each one matters. The first is what I call the facts file. It contains persistent information about my business, my projects, and the people I work with. Who are my key contacts? What's the current status of each project? What tools and services do I use, and how do I access them? This file changes slowly. I might update it when I start a new project, add a new tool, or when someone's role changes, but most of the information stays stable for weeks or months. The second is the rules file. This one captures behavioral instructions. When X happens, do Y. Always present times in Pacific time when I'm in Vancouver. Never suggest I go to bed. I work my own hours. When I forward an email without a comment, treat it as digest material. When I add a comment, treat it as an instruction. The rules file is where a lot of the personality of your assistant lives. Every correction you've ever made, every preference you've expressed, the rules file is where those get preserved. The third is daily notes. This one's different because it's ephemeral. Every day my assistant writes down what happened, tasks completed, things still in progress, decisions made, what's pending for tomorrow. When a new session starts, the assistant reads today's notes and yesterday's notes to pick up where things left off. I'll give you a concrete example. Last month I was producing a series of course videos. The project spanned about 2 weeks. Each day the assistant would write notes. Completed scripts for lessons 1 through 4. Lesson 5 needs revision. Audio files generated for lessons 1 through 3. Next morning the assistant reads those notes and knows exactly where we stand. Here's how these pieces work together. When my assistant starts a session, it reads the facts file, the rules file, and the most recent daily notes. That gives it the baseline, who I am, how I like things done, and what's been happening lately. Then, when a specific task comes up, it loads the relevant skill for that type of work. Think of it like layers. The reference files are the foundation, they're always present. Skills are loaded on demand for specific jobs. Organizing these files takes some thought. I learned early on that one giant document doesn't work. I tried putting everything, facts, rules, procedures, project notes, into a single file. It got bloated fast, and the assistant would sometimes confuse rules with facts or mix up current projects with completed ones. Splitting things into distinct files with clear purposes fixed that. Each file has a job. The facts file holds facts. The rules file holds rules. Daily notes hold daily notes. Sounds obvious, but the clarity matters. Here's a practical starting point. Create 3 files. In the first, write down everything your assistant needs to know about you and your business, the facts. In the second, write down your preferences and behavioral rules. In the third, start keeping daily notes about what you're working on. You don't need to be exhaustive on day 1. These files grow naturally over time as you realize what's missing. The goal is to make your assistant's knowledge persistent and organized. Every fact written down is a question you'll never have to answer twice. Every rule documented is a correction you'll never have to make again. Here's something that might surprise you about AI assistants. They can't actually read everything at once. Every AI has what's called a context window, the total amount of text it can process in a single conversation. Think of it as the AI's working memory. Everything you say, everything it says, every file it reads, every instruction it follows, all of that has to fit inside this window. Modern AI models have large context windows. Some can handle the equivalent of a full novel, but that limit is real, and when you exceed it, things start to go wrong. The AI might forget instructions from earlier in the conversation, miss details from reference files, or produce lower quality responses because it's juggling too much information at once. When I first set up my assistant, I didn't think about this. I loaded every reference file, every skill, every piece of context at the start of every session. As my knowledge base grew, I started noticing problems. The assistant would sometimes contradict its own instructions or ignore a preference I'd clearly documented because it was buried deep in loaded context. The solution is being deliberate about what gets loaded and when. I organize my assistant's knowledge into tiers. The first tier is always-on information, things the assistant needs for every session regardless of what we're working on. my user profile, behavioral rules, and today's daily notes. This core context is relatively small, a few pages of text. The second tier is task-specific information, skills, and references that get loaded when they're relevant. If I'm working on the newsletter skill loads. If I'm editing a website, the WordPress skill loads. There's no reason to load both at the same time. The third tier is archival information, past daily notes, completed project records, reference material I might need occasionally. This stays on disk until something specific calls for it. Here's a practical way to think about it. Imagine your desk. If you piled every document you own on your desk at once, you couldn't find anything and you wouldn't have room to work. Instead, you keep frequently used items within reach and file everything else. Same principle. The context window issue becomes especially important when you delegate to helpers. A helper agent typically gets a smaller context window than your main assistant. That's why self-contained, focused skills matter. They need to be concise enough to fit in a helper's more limited working memory. One thing that caught me off guard, long conversations themselves eat into the context window. If you've been going back and forth with your assistant for an hour, all that conversation text is sitting in memory alongside your reference files. At some point, the earliest parts of the conversation start getting compressed or dropped to make room for new content. Important instructions from early in the conversation can get lost. The practical fix is simple. For long working sessions, start a new conversation periodically. It feels wasteful, like you're losing momentum, but your assistant will reload its reference files and start fresh with a clean context window. Here's another tip that saved me headaches. When you notice your assistant making mistakes that seem inconsistent with its instructions, following a rule in one message and ignoring it in the next, or forgetting details you mentioned earlier, context pressure is often the cause. The fix isn't to repeat yourself louder, it's to reduce what's loaded and restart the conversation. Managing your assistant's information limits isn't glamorous work, but understanding this constraint will save you hours of frustration and make everything else in this course work better. The best documented skills and the most carefully organized reference files won't help if they're all fighting for space in a crowded context window. Load what's needed, archive what's not, and don't be afraid to start fresh when conversations get long. Once your assistant knows how to do things reliably, the natural next question is, should it do them on its own? Automation is where AI assistants go from useful to transformative, but it's also where the stakes get higher. When you're supervising every task in real time, mistakes get caught immediately. When something runs automatically at 3 a.m., mistakes can compound before you even know they happened. I think about automation as a spectrum with 3 levels. The first level is fully automatic. These are tasks that run without my involvement, and I might not even look at the results until the end of the day. My Facebook posts publish automatically. Daily system backups run overnight. The morning health check scans my websites and services for problems. If something's wrong, I'll see it in a report. Otherwise, these tasks just happen. What makes a task safe for full automation? 2 things. The cost of a mistake is low, and the task is easily reversible. If an automated Facebook post has a typo, I can edit or delete it in seconds. If a backup runs unnecessarily, it costs almost nothing. The worst case is minor and fixable. The second level is automatic with approval. The task runs on its own up to the final step, then stops and waits for me to say go. My monthly newsletter works this way. My assistant compiles it automatically, gathering candidates, formatting content, rendering the template. But it never sends until I review the final version and explicitly approve it. Same with customer-facing emails. The assistant drafts them, but they sit in a queue until I confirm they're good. This middle tier is where most of your important recurring tasks should live, at least initially. The automation saves you the tedious preparation work. The approval step keeps you in control of what actually reaches other people. The third level is never automated. Some things should always require a human in the loop, regardless of how good your assistant gets. For me, the never automate list includes directly contacting people on my behalf, deleting important data, anything that costs money, and anything that can't be undone. My assistant can draft an email to a customer, but it can't send it. It can recommend adjusting an ad budget, but it can't change the spending. The cost of getting these wrong is too high. An accidental email to the wrong person, a deleted file that can't be recovered, money spent on something I didn't approve. These aren't things you can fix with a quick edit. How do you decide which tier a task belongs in? I use a simple test. Ask yourself, if my assistant makes a mistake on this task at 3 a.m. and I don't notice until morning, what's the worst that happens? If the answer is minor inconvenience, it's a candidate for full automation. If the answer is embarrassing but fixable, automatic with approval. If the answer is real damage to my business or relationships, it stays manual. Let me give you a real example of why this matters. Early on, my assistant was set up to send welcome emails to new newsletter subscribers. The process was supposed to be automatic. Someone signs up, they get a welcome message. Simple, low risk. Except one day, instead of sending to the 2 or 3 new subscribers, the assistant triggered a batch send to approximately 2,800 contacts. The entire list. Nobody was harmed. It was just a welcome message. But it was embarrassing, and it broke the email platform's sending limits for the day. The root cause was a missing filter. The automation didn't properly distinguish between new subscribers and all subscribers. That incident moved subscriber emails from fully automatic to automatic with approval. Now the assistant prepares the send, shows me exactly who's getting the message and how many recipients there are, and waits for my confirmation. The broader lesson? Start more cautious than you think necessary. You can always upgrade a task to more automation once you're confident it works reliably. Moving in the other direction, adding controls after something goes wrong, is more stressful and usually happens for bad reasons. Your automation tiers should evolve over time. Tasks that start in the approval required tier might graduate to fully automatic after 6 months of perfect execution. Tasks you've been doing manually might move to automatic with approval once you've documented the procedure well enough. Think of it as a trust ladder. Each task earns its autonomy independently. The goal of automation is to multiply your output without replacing your judgment. The tasks worth automating are the ones where your judgment isn't needed, where the decision is already made and only the execution remains. Save your attention for the work that actually requires you. Let the machine handle the rest. The most valuable automation runs on a schedule. Instead of asking your assistant to do something every morning, every week, or every month, you set it up once and it just happens. Scheduled tasks are where you'll recover the most time with the least ongoing effort. Let me walk you through the scheduled tasks my assistant runs because the range might surprise you. Every morning, my assistant generates a report. It checks for new course enrollments, subscription changes, and website issues. It scans my email for anything urgent that came in overnight. It pulls together a brief summary of what needs my attention today. By the time I sit down with coffee, there's a digest waiting for me. Before I set this up, my mornings started with 20 minutes of checking things. Opening the email, logging into each platform, scanning for problems. None of it was hard. All of it was tedious. Now the assistant has already done the checking, and I can start the day thinking about what I want to create. I also have scheduled tasks that run daily without generating a report. File backups run overnight. My entire workspace gets copied to cloud storage. Website monitoring checks that my sites are responding and haven't been compromised. These tasks run silently. I only hear about them when something's wrong. Weekly tasks handle the things I'd otherwise forget. Amazon ad campaign analysis runs every week, reviewing which keywords are performing, which ones are wasting money, and what adjustments to make. A content review scans my social media schedule for the coming week to make sure nothing's stale or missing. Weekly tasks are the unglamorous maintenance work that keeps a business running smoothly. Monthly tasks are bigger. Newsletter compilation starts toward the end of each month, gathering content candidates, assembling the draft, rendering the template. It doesn't send automatically, that requires my approval, but by the time I look at it, 90% of the work is done. Setting up a scheduled task usually follows the same pattern. First, I do the task manually with my assistant a few times until we've worked out all the details. Then I document it as a procedure or skill. Then I set up the schedule and let it run. The first few times I check the results carefully. Once I'm confident, I stop checking unless something looks off. Here are some things I've learned about scheduled tasks that might save you trial and error. First, timing matters more than you'd think. I schedule my morning report early enough that it's ready when I wake up, but late enough that overnight events have settled. Backups run at 2 a.m. because nothing else is competing for resources. Weekly reports run on Monday mornings, so I start the week informed. Think about when you'll actually use the output and schedule accordingly. Second, every scheduled task should have a timeout. I learned this one the hard way. A helper task that was supposed to take 5 minutes got stuck in a loop and ran for hours, consuming resources the entire time. Now every scheduled task has a maximum runtime. If it hasn't finished by then, it stops and sends me an alert. Better to have a failed task you know about than a runaway task you don't. Third, keep scheduled tasks focused. A single task that tries to do 5 different things will be fragile and hard to debug when something goes wrong. I have separate tasks that each do one thing well. If the backup fails, it doesn't take down the morning report with it. Fourth, make the output visible. Every scheduled task writes its results somewhere I can review them. The morning report gets sent to me directly. Backup logs go to a file I can check if needed. Weekly reports get saved to shared storage. If a scheduled task runs but produces no visible output, you'll never know if it's working or if it silently broke 3 weeks ago. The compound effect of scheduled tasks is remarkable. Each individual task saves maybe 10 or 20 minutes. That sounds modest, but across a week it adds up to hours. And the time saved isn't just about minutes, it's about mental space. I don't wake up with a checklist of things to verify before I can start real work. The routine is handled. My mornings now start with creative thinking instead of administrative busy work. That's a fundamentally different way to begin the day. There's a limit to how fast one assistant can work. It processes tasks one at a time, sequentially. If you need 8 things done, they happen one after another. For most daily work, that's fine. But for larger projects, batch processing, parallel research, content production, sequential execution becomes a bottleneck. The solution is helpers. Your main assistant can spin up temporary helpers that work on specific tasks independently, then report back when they're finished. Let me give you a real example. I produce courses. The one you're taking right now was built this way. A course might have 30 lessons, each needing a narration script. If my main assistant wrote all 30 scripts one by one, it would take hours of sequential work and tie up the assistant the entire time. Instead, my assistant delegates. It spins up a helper and says, write the scripts for lessons 1 through 4. Then another helper for lessons 5 through 8, and so on. Multiple helpers work simultaneously, and my main assistant stays available for whatever else I need. When the helpers finish, they report their results back, and the main assistant assembles everything. What used to take an entire afternoon now finishes in a fraction of the time. Helpers aren't limited to content creation. I use them for research tasks too. When I need competitive analysis, say, what other courses exist in a particular topic, I can send multiple helpers to research different platforms simultaneously. One checks Udemy, another checks Skillshare, another looks at YouTube. They all report back, and my main assistant synthesizes the findings. Data processing is another good fit. Batch updating a contact list, processing a backlog of newsletter candidates, reformatting a collection of files. Anything where the same operation applies to multiple items can be parallelized. But here's the important part. Helpers aren't free, and they're not always the right choice. Each helper is basically a new assistant with its own context window. It needs instructions, relevant skills, and enough context to do its job. That means you're spending resources to spin it up, processing capacity and money. For a 2-minute task, the overhead of creating a helper isn't worth it. Just do it sequentially. My rule of thumb, use a helper when the task would take more than 15 minutes to do sequentially and can be clearly divided into independent pieces. If the pieces depend on each other, step 2 needs the output of step 1, then sequential is actually the right approach. There's also a quality consideration. Helpers work with less context than your main assistant. Your main assistant has read all your reference files, knows the full history of today's conversation, and understands the big picture. A helper gets a subset of that, usually just the specific skill and instructions for its task. That means helpers are great at well-defined, self-contained work, but less reliable for tasks that require judgment about context they don't have. I've learned to write very clear briefs for helper tasks. Not write a blog post about productivity. More like, write a 600-word blog post about email automation for small business owners, using our writing voice guide, targeting readers who are curious about AI but haven't started using it. The more specific the brief, the better the helper's output. One thing that caught me off guard early on was runaway helpers. A helper that gets stuck in a loop will keep running and consuming resources until someone stops it. I had one helper task burn through 2.6 million tokens before I caught it. That's the equivalent of leaving a taximeter running while the driver does laps around the block. The fix is simple. Every helper gets a timeout and a token budget. If it exceeds either limit, it stops. These guardrails cost you nothing when things go well, and save you a lot when things don't. Here's how to think about helpers as your setup matures. Start without them. Get your main assistant working well with good reference files and solid skills. Then, when you hit a task that feels like it should be parallelized, try spinning up one helper. Review its output critically. Did it follow the instructions? Did the quality meet your standards? Once you're comfortable with the process, you can scale up to multiple helpers running simultaneously. The beauty of the helper model is that it mirrors how delegation works in real life. You have a trusted executive assistant, your main AI, who understands your business deeply. When there's more work than one person can handle, that assistant brings in contractors for specific jobs. The contractors do their piece and report back. Your trusted assistant handles quality control and puts it all together. You're not just using a tool anymore. You're managing a small team. And that shift from solo operator to someone who delegates, reviews, and coordinates is where the real productivity gains live. I want to paint a picture of what a typical day looks like now that I'm working with an AI assistant. Not the theoretical version, the actual one, with real tasks, real hiccups, and real results. I should mention, I've been working with my assistant for months, so this is a mature setup. Your first week won't look like this, and it shouldn't. But this gives you a sense of where things are headed once you've built up the knowledge base and automation we've covered in this course. Morning starts before I do. By 7 a.m., my assistant has already run its morning routine, checking for new course enrollments, scanning for website issues, pulling overnight email summaries. There's a report waiting for me with everything that happened while I was asleep. Most days it's short, a couple of new enrollments, no problems. Some days there's a flag, a website that's not responding, or an unusual spike in email bounces. I read the report over coffee. If something needs attention, I handle it right away. If everything's clear, I move on. The first real work of the day usually arrives via email. I get customer inquiries, business correspondence, server notifications, and forwarded articles from colleagues. I don't process most of this myself. I forward emails to my assistant. No comment means read this and file it. A comment means do something with this. The assistant categorizes everything. Customer questions get drafted responses that I review before they're sent. Server notifications get logged. Articles get tagged as potential newsletter material. Within about 30 minutes, my inbox is processed, and I haven't written a single email myself. Mid-morning is usually when I do creative work, writing, course production, content planning. My assistant is active during this time, but in a support role. I might say, draft an outline for a blog post about X and get back a structured starting point within a minute. Or I'll ask it to research a topic I'm considering for a new course. The assistant does the legwork. I make the decisions. Around midday, scheduled tasks start producing output. A social media post goes out to Facebook automatically. The weekly Amazon ads analysis might arrive if it's the right day, showing me which book campaigns are performing and which need adjustment. Afternoon is when I tend to tackle bigger projects. Last month, that meant producing video lectures for a new course. My assistant handled the script drafting, audio generation, and file management while I focused on reviewing and approving each piece. The back and forth was constant. This paragraph sounds too formal. Loosen it up, or add a specific example here instead of a general statement. But the heavy lifting was delegated. If a project has multiple independent pieces, my assistant spins up helpers. While I'm reviewing scripts for one section, helpers are drafting scripts for the next. While I'm approving audio for Lesson 3, audio for Lessons 4 through 6 is being generated in parallel. It's a pipeline, and the throughput is dramatically higher than doing everything one at a time. Throughout the day, small tasks come in that would have been friction points before. What's the current enrollment count for the mystery writing course? Instant answer. Update the price on the bundle page from $49 to $39. Done in seconds. Check if our SSL certificates are all current. Checked, and they are. None of these tasks are hard, but each one used to mean logging into a platform, navigating to the right page, and finding the information. Now it takes about 10 seconds. Late afternoon, I often handle the marketing tasks I don't particularly enjoy. Newsletter preparation, social media planning, ad copy updates. My assistant does most of the actual work. I provide direction and approval. Honestly, these are the tasks where the assistant saves me the most frustration. I'd procrastinate on marketing for weeks without this setup. Now it gets done because the barrier to starting is almost zero. I just say what needs to happen and review the output. Evening winds down with a status report. My assistant compiles everything that happened during the day, tasks completed, decisions made, things still in progress, anything pending for tomorrow. The report gets saved to my shared storage so I can review it from any device. It's also the handoff document. Tomorrow morning, the assistant will read this report and pick up where we left off. Looking at a day like this, the pattern is clear. I spend my time on decisions, creative work, and quality control. My assistant handles research, drafting, scheduling, monitoring, and execution. The tedious stuff, the checking, the formatting, the routine maintenance has been absorbed by the system we built together. It took months to get here. The skills were built one at a time. The automation was added gradually. The trust was earned through experience, but the compound effect is hard to overstate. I'm producing more content, responding faster to customers, and spending less time on work I don't enjoy, all while running a business that used to feel like it needed a staff of 3, one person and a well-trained assistant. That's the whole team. Email is the task that convinced me an AI assistant was worth the effort. Not because it's glamorous, it's the opposite. But email eats hours every week, and most of it follows patterns. Patterns are exactly what an AI assistant handles well. Here's how my setup works. I have an email address where customers and students write in with questions. My assistant checks that inbox automatically, several times a day. When a new message arrives, the assistant reads it, figures out what kind of message it is, and decides what to do. Some messages get handled without me ever seeing them. A student asks how to reset their password. The assistant knows the answer and sends a polite reply. Someone asks about course pricing? Same thing. The information is in the assistant's knowledge base, and it drafts and sends the response. These are routine questions with clear, factual answers. There's no judgment call involved, so there's no reason for me to be in the loop. Other messages get flagged for my review if someone writes with a complaint or asks something unusual, or if the assistant isn't confident about the right response, it drafts a reply and shows it to me. I glance at it, maybe tweak a word or two, and approve it. That takes me 30 seconds instead of 5 minutes. And some messages stay entirely in my hands. Anything personal, anything sensitive, anything involving money, those come to me directly. The assistant might summarize them so I have context, but it doesn't draft a response or take action. Those 3 tiers are important. Fully automatic for the routine stuff. Draft and approve for anything that needs a human eye. Hands off for anything that matters too much to delegate. Getting those boundaries right took some trial and error, but once they're set, the system runs smoothly. Beyond individual replies, the assistant manages my contact lists. When someone subscribes to my newsletter, they get added to the right list automatically. When someone buys a course, their record gets updated. I used to do all of this by hand in my email marketing platform, and I'd fall behind constantly. Now it just happens. The assistant also handles forwarded email. Throughout my day, I forward messages from my personal inbox. If I forward something without adding a comment, the assistant knows its background information, maybe a news article I want saved, or a receipt to file. If I forward something with a comment like, "Please respond to this," the assistant drafts a reply for me to review. That forwarding workflow is one of the simplest things I set up, and it's one of the most valuable. Here's what I want you to take away from this. The goal with email isn't to have your AI write all your correspondence. It's to handle the 80% that's predictable so you can focus on the 20% that actually needs your brain. Those password reset questions, pricing inquiries, routine follow-ups, they have correct answers. Your assistant can learn those answers and deliver them reliably. But communication that requires empathy, nuance, or relationship building, keep that. A customer who's frustrated needs to hear from you, not from your assistant pretending to be you. One more thing about email that surprised me. The assistant catches things I miss. It monitors for messages that need follow-up, flags conversations that have gone quiet, and reminds me about commitments I made 3 weeks ago in a thread I've forgotten about. It's like having a colleague who actually reads every email and has a perfect memory for details. Start with the easy wins. Teach your assistant the 10 most common questions your customers ask. Give it the correct answers. Let it handle those, with your approval at first. Once you're confident it's getting them right, let it run. Then add the next layer. Before long, you'll open your inbox and find that most of the work is already done. If you run a business, you're supposed to be creating content constantly. Blog posts, newsletters, social media updates, email campaigns, course descriptions. The advice from every marketing guru is the same. Publish more, publish often, be everywhere. The problem is that content takes time. Good content takes a lot of time. And if you're running a business by yourself or with a small team, you're already short on hours. So either the content doesn't get written, or it gets written badly, or you burn out trying to keep up. My AI assistant changed that equation, not by replacing my voice, by handling the parts of content creation that don't require my voice. Let me walk you through how my newsletter works. Every month I send a newsletter to my subscribers. Throughout the month, the assistant collects candidates, interesting topics, tips I've mentioned, student questions worth addressing, news from my courses. It saves these in a running list. Around the 28th of each month, the assistant compiles a draft. It pulls from the candidate list, writes up each item in my style, formats the whole thing as a proper HTML email with sections and headers, and sends me a preview. I read it, make edits, and when I'm happy with it, I tell the assistant to send it. Only then does it go out. That last part matters. The assistant never sends the newsletter on its own. Compiling is automatic. Sending requires me to say go in real time. For blog posts, the process is similar. I give the assistant a topic and some rough direction, maybe a paragraph of notes or even just a sentence. It writes a full draft. And here's what makes the drafts actually usable. The assistant knows my writing style. Early on, I created a detailed style guide. It lists phrases I never want to see in my writing. Dive into, straightforward, game changer, all of those are banned. It specifies formatting rules, short paragraphs, contractions, specific numbers instead of vague claims. It describes the tone I want, warm and direct, like talking to a friend. Honest about limitations. No hype. The assistant follows that guide for every piece of content it writes. The result is first drafts that sound like me, not like a chatbot. They still need my review. I'll rearrange things, sharpen a point, cut a section that doesn't work, but I'm editing, not rewriting. That's a huge difference. Social media is where automation shines brightest. I have posts going out to Facebook automatically. The assistant writes them, schedules them, and publishes them without me being involved. For platforms where the stakes are a little higher, like X, where people actually reply and argue, the assistant drafts posts for me to review before they go out. The key to all of this is quality control, and quality control means having standards the assistant can follow. That style guide I mentioned isn't a nice to have, it's essential. Without it, the assistant writes generic content that sounds like every other AI-generated text on the internet. With it, the content has a point of view. It has personality. It has things it refuses to say. My marketing copy goes through a scoring process. After the assistant writes something, it evaluates the draft against my brand standards, checking for banned phrases, making sure the tone matches, verifying that claims are specific and supported. If the score is low, it revises before showing me. I only see drafts that have already passed a quality check. Here's the honest truth about AI and content. The first draft is the easy part. The hard part is making sure that first draft matches your standards, your voice, and your audience's expectations. If you invest time teaching your assistant what good looks like for your business, the content pipeline transforms. You go from dreading the monthly newsletter to barely thinking about it. Start with one piece of recurring content, your weekly social post, your monthly email, whatever you publish regularly. Build the workflow, get the quality right, then expand from there. I need to be upfront about something. AI research has a trust problem. Your assistant will confidently tell you things that are completely made up. I've seen it invent book titles, fabricate statistics, and provide details about documents that don't exist, all stated with the same matter-of-fact tone it uses for things that are true. So why am I dedicating an entire lesson to research? Because when you use it correctly, AI research saves enormous amounts of time. The key is knowing when to trust it, when to verify, and when to skip it entirely. Let me break it down by category. AI research is highly reliable for synthesizing information you provide. If you give your assistant a 50-page report and ask for a summary, it'll do an excellent job. It's reading what you gave it. It can't fabricate content that's right in front of it. Same with analyzing data you supply, spreadsheets, survey results, sales figures. The assistant is working with your source material, and it's genuinely good at finding patterns and pulling out key points. AI research is moderately reliable for general knowledge. If you ask it to explain how email marketing platforms handle bounce rates, or what the standard terms in a book publishing contract look like, you'll get solid answers. These are well-documented topics with consistent information across many sources. The assistant is drawing from broad training data, and for mainstream subjects, that data is usually accurate. AI research is unreliable for specific facts. Names, dates, URLs, phone numbers, current prices, recent events, verify all of it. Every time. The assistant doesn't know what it doesn't know. It'll guess rather than say, "I'm not sure," and that guess will sound completely authoritative. Here's how I actually use AI research in my business. I manage advertising campaigns for my books on Amazon. Each week, the assistant pulls performance data, which keywords are working, which ones are wasting money, how the cost per click compares to what I'm willing to spend. It analyzes search terms, identifies new keywords worth testing, and flags campaigns that need attention. That works well because the assistant is analyzing real data from a real source. It's not guessing, it's calculating. This keyword cost $15 in clicks and generated $3 in sales. That's a losing proposition. There's nothing to fabricate in that analysis. I also use the assistant for competitive research. What are similar courses priced at? What topics are trending in my niche? What questions are people asking in relevant forums? For this kind of broad reconnaissance, the assistant does the initial sweep and I spot check the findings. Web research is another strong area because many AI assistants can actually search the internet in real time. When Mind does web research, it's pulling current results from actual websites, not relying on training data that might be months old. It can fetch a page, read the content, and summarize what it finds. That's genuinely useful for staying current. The workflow I'd recommend is this. Use your assistant for the first pass. Let it gather information, summarize sources, identify patterns, and organize findings. Then apply your judgment. Does this make sense? Do the numbers add up? Are the sources real? That human verification layer is essential. One more thing. AI is great at a specific kind of analysis that humans find tedious. Comparing large sets of information. If you have 200 customer reviews and want to know the 5 most common complaints, your assistant can read all 200 and give you a summary in about 30 seconds. Doing that yourself would take an hour. And since the reviews are right there in the input, the assistant isn't making anything up. It's pattern matching across real data. The bottom line. Treat AI research the way you'd treat a very fast, very eager intern with a tendency to bluff when they don't know the answer. Great for gathering, organizing, and analyzing. Verify before you trust. Maintaining a website used to eat half my week. I manage multiple WordPress sites, my main course platform, a blog, a couple of food review sites I run for fun. Each one needs regular updates, new course descriptions, blog posts, page edits, plugin updates, broken link fixes. None of it is difficult. All of it is tedious. My AI assistant handles most of it now, and the way it works might surprise you because the assistant doesn't use a web browser the way you or I would. It talks directly to the website through what's called an API. A backdoor that lets software make changes without clicking through a visual interface. WordPress has a built-in API that lets you create posts, update pages, manage media, and change settings, all through structured commands. My assistant uses that API to make edits I'd otherwise do by hand. Need to update a course description? I tell the assistant what to change, and it updates the page. Need to publish a blog post? The assistant creates it, formats it, and publishes it. This is faster than doing it myself in the WordPress editor, and it's less error-prone. The assistant follows the same formatting rules every time. It doesn't accidentally delete a section while scrolling. It doesn't forget to set the featured image or the SEO description. My course platform is another example. I sell courses through Teachable, and students enroll, cancel, and ask questions all the time. The assistant monitors the platform for new enrollments and subscription changes. That monitoring runs automatically. Every morning, the assistant checks what happened overnight and includes it in my daily report. 3 new enrollments in the mystery writing course, 1 cancellation in novel writing. I see the summary without logging in. For more complex website work, the assistant and I collaborate. When I needed to redesign a landing page, I described what I wanted. The assistant wrote the HTML and CSS, and I reviewed the result. We went back and forth. Make the headline bigger. Move that section above the testimonials. The button color is wrong. Each round of changes took the assistant about 30 seconds. The same work with a freelance web developer would have involved emails, mock-ups, revision rounds, and days of waiting. The assistant also handles the invisible maintenance work that keeps websites healthy. Monitoring uptime, is the site actually loading? Checking for broken links. Backing up files to cloud storage. These are automated tasks that run on a schedule and only bother me when something goes wrong. Here's a real example of how this saves time. I run food review sites for several cities. When I visit a restaurant and want to write about it, I jot down some notes and share them with the assistant. It writes the review in the right style for that blog, formats it with the restaurant details and location, and publishes it. What used to take me 30 minutes of formatting and uploading takes me 2 minutes of note-taking. Managing your online presence with an AI assistant works well for a specific reason. Websites are structured, they have defined fields, title, body, category, featured image, publication date. The assistant can fill in those fields reliably because there's no ambiguity about what goes where. Contrast that with something like Write Me a Creative Marketing Strategy, which is open-ended and subjective. Website updates are concrete and verifiable. If you have a website you maintain, start by identifying the repetitive tasks. What do you update weekly? What follows the same pattern every time? those are your automation candidates. Your assistant can learn the structure of your site and handle those updates, freeing you to focus on the content decisions that actually need your input. One word of caution. Always have your assistant save a backup before making significant page changes. WordPress revisions help, but having an independent backup means you can roll back quickly if something looks wrong. My assistant does this automatically now, saves the current version before making any edit. That safety net was my idea after one too many, wait, what did it look like before? Moments. I've written 29 books. I've produced dozens of online courses. And in all that time, the thing I've dreaded most isn't the writing, it's everything that happens after the writing. Formatting, assembly, converting between file formats, making sure the table of contents matches the actual chapters. Tedious, detail-oriented work that doesn't require creativity, but does require patience. My AI assistant is excellent at this. Let me show you how I use it for different kinds of documents. Course production is the big one. Right now, the assistant is helping me build Udemy courses, including, in a rather meta twist, the course you're watching. The workflow goes like this. I write a course outline. The assistant takes that outline and writes full narration scripts for each lesson, following my voice and style rules. Those scripts get converted to audio using text-to-speech technology. Then the assistant helps assemble slides, coordinate visuals, and package everything for upload. The scripts alone would take me weeks to write from scratch. The assistant produces drafts in hours. I review and edit, sometimes heavily, sometimes barely, and we move forward. The total time from outline to finished scripts drops from weeks to days. For books, the assistant handles manuscript formatting. Self-publishing on Amazon requires specific formatting for both ebook and print editions. Headers, page breaks, front matter, back matter, chapter numbering, all of it needs to be exact. The assistant knows the requirements and formats the manuscript accordingly. It also manages the metadata, book descriptions, keywords, categories, and all the little details Amazon's publishing platform demands. Reports are another sweet spot. My assistant produces a daily status report that captures everything that happened, tasks completed, decisions made, issues encountered, what's in progress. That report gets saved to my cloud storage so I can review it from anywhere. It's essentially a daily log of my entire business operation, written by someone who was present for all of it. Monthly newsletters, which I mentioned earlier, are document production too. The assistant compiles content, writes it up, renders it as formatted HTML, and delivers a preview. The technical work of turning text into a professional-looking email template happens automatically. Here's what makes AI particularly good at document production. It doesn't get bored, and it doesn't make inconsistency errors. If I tell it that every chapter title should be in title case centered with 2 blank lines after it, that's what I get. Every single time. Human formatters, including me, get sloppy by chapter 12. The assistant doesn't. The same applies to repetitive document tasks. Need to rename 50 files following a specific convention? Convert a batch of documents from one format to another? Extract specific sections from a long report? These are exactly the kind of tasks that are simple to describe but painful to do by hand. Your assistant handles them without complaint and without getting careless halfway through. I should mention where AI document production falls short. Complex visual layouts are still difficult. If your document needs precise graphic design, charts with specific styling, images positioned exactly right, multi-column layouts, you'll probably need a dedicated design tool. The assistant can prepare the content, but the final visual polish often needs a human touch or specialized software. Tables are another weak spot. AI can create simple tables, but complex ones with merged cells, specific column widths, and conditional formatting tend to go wrong. For documents heavy on tabular data, I've learned to do the table work myself and let the assistant handle everything else. The broader principle here is that AI assistants are at their best when document production has clear rules. A style guide, a template, a set of formatting requirements, give it those and the output is consistent and fast. The less defined the target, the more you'll need to review and adjust. My recommendation? Pick one document you produce regularly. A weekly report, a monthly summary, a quarterly review. Build a template. Define the structure. Let your assistant produce the first draft. You'll be surprised how much time you get back and how the consistency improves when the formatting rules are followed by something that doesn't have off days. When I first started working with my AI assistant, I didn't let it do anything important. I asked it questions. I had it summarize documents. I tested it with things where a mistake wouldn't matter. That was deliberate. Trust with an AI assistant works like trust with a new employee. You don't hand someone the keys to your business on day one. You start with low-stakes tasks, verify the results, and gradually increase responsibility as they prove themselves. The difference with AI is that the consequences of misplaced trust can be faster and bigger. An AI can send 1,000 emails in the time it takes a person to send one. I think of it as a trust ladder, and each rung needs to be earned. The first rung is reading. Let your assistant access your files, your knowledge base, your documentation. Ask it questions about your own material. This is essentially zero risk. If it gets something wrong, you just correct it. No one else is affected. The second rung is writing drafts. Have your assistant draft emails, blog posts, reports, anything that you'll review before it goes anywhere. You're the filter. If the draft is terrible, you rewrite it. If it's good, you send it. The assistant is doing work, but nothing leaves your desk without your approval. The third rung is publishing low-risk content. For me, this meant letting the assistant post to Facebook automatically. Facebook posts for my business are promotional. They drive traffic, but no single post matters much. If one comes out awkward, I can edit or delete it. The cost of a mistake is low, and the time saved by automation is real. The fourth rung is publishing high-risk content, newsletters that go to thousands of subscribers, emails to individual customers, course descriptions that affect buying decisions. These still require my explicit approval. The assistant compiles and drafts. I review and authorize. The fifth rung, and I'm still cautious about this one, is anything that involves spending money. Ad campaigns, platform upgrades, service subscriptions. Right now, my assistant manages ad bids within parameters I've set, but any budget change needs my sign-off. I'm not comfortable giving it a credit card and saying, figure it out. The speed at which you climb this ladder depends on your comfort level and your assistant's track record. I moved through the first two rungs in about a week. Publishing low-risk content took another couple of weeks of verification. High-risk publishing is still gated by approval months later, and I'm fine with that. Here's what matters. Define your rungs before you need them. Decide in advance what your assistant can do independently, what needs your approval, and what stays in your hands entirely. Write those rules down so your assistant follows them consistently. Don't make these decisions in the moment, because in the moment you'll be tempted to skip a step because it's convenient. The verification habit is important early on. For the first few weeks, check everything. Read every draft. Confirm every fact. It feels slow, but you're building a mental model of where your assistant is reliable and where it isn't. That model is worth having before you start trusting it with higher stakes work. One thing that helped me, I built approval requirements directly into the assistant's procedures. It's not that I choose to review the newsletter before sending. The assistant literally cannot send it without my real-time confirmation. That's a structural safeguard, not a personal discipline one. Structural safeguards are stronger than willpower because they work even when you're tired, distracted, or in a hurry. Trust isn't binary. You don't either trust your assistant or you don't. You trust it with specific tasks at specific levels of autonomy. That granularity is what makes the whole thing work. I want to tell you about two real mistakes, not hypothetical risks, things that actually happened to me, because the best way to learn about AI safety is from someone who's already made the errors. The first one, the accidental email blast. Right. My assistant handles email for my newsletter subscribers. When someone new signs up, they get a welcome message. Simple, routine, low risk. Except one day, something went wrong with how the task was set up. Instead of sending welcome emails to the 2 or 3 people who just subscribed, the assistant triggered a batch send to my entire contact list, approximately 2,800 people. Now here's the thing. Nobody was harmed. The message was just a welcome email. It was polite, it was on brand, it was technically correct. But 2,800 people got a message they weren't supposed to receive. It was embarrassing. Worse, it exceeded my email platform's sending limits, which broke the automation system and took time to sort out. The lesson was clear. Any task that can affect a large number of people needs a hard approval gate. It doesn't matter how routine the task seems. The difference between send to 3 people and send to 3,000 people is a bug, not a decision. Your assistant should never be able to make that kind of error without you in the loop. The second mistake, the runaway subagent. I mentioned earlier that assistants can delegate work to helpers, subagents that handle specific tasks. I assigned a batch processing job to a subagent and something went wrong. The helper got stuck in a loop, doing the same work over and over without finishing. By the time I noticed, it had burned through 2.6 million tokens. Think of tokens like a taxi meter. Every word the AI reads or writes costs something. A normal task might use a few thousand tokens. This one used 2.6 million because it ran in circles with nobody watching. That single runaway task noticeably impacted my costs for the month. The fix was simple. Now every subagent has a timeout. If it runs longer than expected, it gets shut down automatically. But I had to learn that lesson the hard way. Beyond my own mistakes, there's the confidence problem I've mentioned before. AI states incorrect information with complete conviction. It doesn't say I think or I'm not sure. It just tells you in the same authoritative tone it uses for everything else. I've had my assistant provide detailed information about documents that didn't exist, not vague information, specific details, as if it had read the thing. This is the most insidious failure mode because it's the hardest to catch. The email blast was obvious immediately. The runaway subagent showed up in cost monitoring. But a confidently wrong answer, you only catch that if you're checking, and the more you trust your assistant, the less inclined you are to check. So, what do you do with all this? Build safeguards that don't depend on you being vigilant. Require approvals for high-impact actions. Set timeouts on automated tasks. Monitor costs so you catch anomalies early. Verify factual claims, especially names, dates, and numbers. And accept that mistakes will happen. They happen with human employees too. The goal isn't perfection, it's limiting the blast radius. When something goes wrong, and it will, the damage should be embarrassing at worst, not catastrophic. Design your systems with that principle in mind, and you'll sleep better. Let's talk about money. Running an AI assistant costs real dollars, and if you're not paying attention, those dollars can add up faster than you'd expect. The primary cost driver is the AI model itself. Every time your assistant reads something, thinks about it, or writes a response that uses computational resources measured in tokens. A token is roughly 3/4 of a word. A 1,000-word email exchange might use a few thousand tokens. A complex research task might use tens of thousands, and those tokens cost money. How much? It depends on which model you're using. AI models come in different tiers. The most capable models, the ones that handle nuanced tasks, write better drafts, and make fewer mistakes, cost more per token. Simpler models that handle routine tasks cost less. Most setups let you choose which model handles which tasks, and that choice matters a lot for your monthly bill. My setup uses a more capable model for the main assistant, the one I'm talking to directly, the one handling complex decisions and writing. For sub-agents doing routine work like data formatting or simple lookups, it uses a less expensive model. That tiering keeps costs reasonable without sacrificing quality where it counts. The biggest cost surprises come from 3 sources. First, long conversations. The way AI works, it rereads the entire conversation every time it responds. A conversation that's been going for hours with lots of back and forth gets expensive because each new response requires processing everything that came before it. Breaking long sessions into smaller ones helps. Second, unnecessary thinking. Some AI models have a feature where they reason through problems step by step before responding. That reasoning uses tokens too, sometimes a lot of them. For simple tasks like post this to Facebook, extensive reasoning is a waste. Turning off deep thinking for routine tasks saves money. Third, runaway processes. I told you about my sub-agent that burned through 2.6 million tokens. That was an extreme case, but even moderate inefficiency adds up. A task that should use 5,000 tokens but uses 50,000 because of poor instructions or a retry loop, that's 10 times the cost. Multiply that by dozens of tasks per day, and it matters. So how do you manage this? Monitoring is the foundation. You should be able to see how many tokens you're using daily and what's driving the usage. Most AI platforms provide dashboards or logs. Check them regularly, especially when you're setting up new automated tasks. Set budgets and alerts. Decide what you're comfortable spending per month and configure warnings when you're approaching that limit. The specific numbers will vary depending on your provider and usage, but having a number, any number, is better than hoping it works out. Optimize your instructions. Clear, specific instructions produce faster, cheaper responses. Vague instructions lead to longer outputs, more clarification, and wasted tokens. The investment you made in clear procedures and good skills pays off here too. It's not just about quality, it's about efficiency. Match the model to the task. Use your best, most expensive model for work that requires nuance and judgment. Use cheaper models for routine, well-defined tasks. If you have an assistant that delegates to sub-agents, make sure those sub-agents are using the appropriate tier. What does it actually cost? I'll give you a rough sense without specific numbers because pricing changes constantly. Running a capable AI assistant that handles dozens of tasks per day using a mix of model tiers costs roughly what you'd pay for a modest software subscription. It's real money, but it's a fraction of what a part-time human assistant would cost, and it's available 24 hours a day. The month my runaway sub-agent went haywire, my costs roughly doubled. That was unpleasant but not catastrophic, and it taught me to set guardrails. Since implementing timeouts and monitoring, my costs have been predictable and reasonable. Think of cost management as part of the delegation skill. You wouldn't hire a contractor without discussing rates. Same principle here. Understand what things cost, monitor the spending, and optimize where you can. Your AI assistant, if it's doing real work for your business, will have access to sensitive information. Customer names, email addresses, business financials, passwords and login credentials, private conversations. That access is necessary. The assistant can't manage your email without reading your email, but it comes with real responsibilities. Let me walk through how I think about privacy and security with my AI assistant, because I went through a deliberate process of deciding what it should and shouldn't have access to. First, understand what your assistant can see. If your assistant has access to your email, it can read every message. If it has your website credentials, it can see everything on your site. If you paste a financial document into a conversation, the AI has processed that data. You need to be clear-eyed about the scope of access you're granting. In my case, the assistant has access to quite a lot. Email credentials, website admin passwords, API keys for various services, customer contact lists, financial data from advertising campaigns. Each of those access points was a deliberate decision, granted because the assistant needs it for specific tasks. Here's the important question. What happens to the information your assistant processes? The answer depends on your specific setup, and it's worth understanding. When you use an AI through an API, which is how most persistent assistants work, your conversations are generally not used to train the AI model. This is different from free consumer tools, where your input might become training data. API usage typically comes with stronger privacy terms, but typically isn't always, so read the terms of service for whatever platform you're using. Even with good privacy terms, your data is being processed on someone else's servers. The AI provider's infrastructure handles your information, at least temporarily. If you're in a regulated industry, healthcare, finance, legal, this matters a lot, and you may need specific compliance guarantees. For most small businesses, the practical framework is simple. Treat your AI assistant like you'd treat a remote contractor. A contractor who works on your marketing would see your customer list and brand materials. They wouldn't need your bank account password. Same principle applies to your assistant. I follow a few specific rules. The assistant has the credentials it needs for the services it manages: email, website, social media, advertising. It doesn't have access to my personal bank accounts, my personal email, or my investment portfolio. Those boundaries are deliberate. Customer data deserves special attention. My assistant processes customer names and email addresses because it manages my contact lists and responds to inquiries. That's necessary. But I don't have it analyzing sensitive customer information, building profiles, or sharing customer data between systems in ways the customers wouldn't expect. Respect for customer privacy isn't just ethical. In many jurisdictions, it's the law. Passwords and credentials should be stored securely, not scattered through random conversations. My assistant has a dedicated, secure file for credentials rather than remembering them from past conversations. If a conversation gets summarized or compressed, important credentials shouldn't get lost, and they shouldn't be floating around in unprotected logs either. Here are my practical recommendations. Keep an inventory of what your assistant has access to. Literally write it down. When you see the list in one place, you might decide some of those access points aren't necessary. Revoke anything your assistant doesn't actively need. Use dedicated credentials when possible. If your assistant needs access to your website, create a separate login for it rather than sharing your personal admin account. That way, you can see what the assistant did versus what you did, and you can revoke its access independently. Be thoughtful about what you paste into conversations. Every time you share information with your assistant, that data gets processed by the AI provider. Don't paste sensitive documents unless there's a genuine reason. Talk to your customers about AI if it's handling their communications. You don't need to make a big announcement, but if someone asks whether they're talking to a human, be honest. Transparency builds trust. Deception destroys it. Security isn't a one-time setup. It's an ongoing practice, just like locking your office door. Periodically review what your assistant has access to, update credentials that have been in use too long, and stay aware of how your AI provider's policies evolve. The goal is using AI's capabilities while being a responsible steward of the information it touches. That's manageable. It just requires thinking about it deliberately instead of granting access by default. I've been using an AI assistant daily for months, and even in that short time, the capabilities have changed noticeably. Models get smarter, costs go down, new features appear that weren't possible a few months earlier. So where is all of this heading? Let me share what I've observed and what I think it means for people using AI assistants in their businesses. The most obvious trend is that AI models keep getting better at understanding context. When I first started, I had to be extremely precise with instructions. Ambiguity led to mistakes. Today, the assistant handles looser instructions much better. It infers things from context that it used to miss entirely. That trend will continue. Future models will understand your intent more naturally, requiring less careful prompt engineering from you. Costs are dropping. The same quality of AI output keeps getting cheaper as new models launch. New models are more efficient, and competition between AI providers pushes prices down. For users, this means that tasks you might avoid today because of cost will become affordable. Running more sub-agents, doing deeper analysis, processing larger documents, the economic barriers keep shrinking. Memory and context are improving. Right now, AI assistants have a finite context window, a limit on how much information they can consider at once. That window has been growing rapidly. What started as a few pages of text has expanded to handle the equivalent of a full book. Larger context windows mean your assistant can work with more of your information at once, producing better results without complex workarounds. Multimodal capabilities are expanding. AI assistants are getting better at working with images, audio, and video, not just text. Your assistant might soon be able to watch a screen recording and tell you what went wrong, or look at a design mock-up and suggest improvements. That opens up categories of work that are currently text-only. Tool use is maturing. AI assistants are getting better at using external tools, browsing the web, interacting with APIs, controlling software. My assistant already manages websites through APIs and interacts with multiple platforms. That capability is becoming more reliable and more broadly available. Future assistants will be able to interact with more of your software ecosystem with less custom setup. Here's what's still hard and what I don't expect to change quickly. Judgment and taste remain human territory. AI can generate options, but deciding which option is right for your brand, your audience, your situation, that's still you. I don't see that changing in any meaningful time frame. The assistant gets better at presenting choices. The choosing stays with you. Reliability for critical tasks is improving, but not solved. AI assistants still make mistakes that a competent human wouldn't make. They miss context that seems obvious. They occasionally produce output that's subtly wrong in ways that are hard to catch. This is improving. Each generation of models is more reliable, but I'd be dishonest if I said you'll ever stop needing to verify important output. Creative vision, the ability to see a possibility that doesn't exist yet and make it real, remains distinctly human. AI can draft, iterate, and polish. It can even surprise you with an approach you hadn't considered. But the spark of, here's what we should build, still comes from you. So what should you do with all of this? 3 things. First, stay current, but don't chase every new tool. The AI landscape changes weekly. New models, new features, new startups. You don't need to try everything. Pay attention to your AI provider's major updates and evaluate whether they help your specific workflow. Ignore the hype cycle. Second, keep investing in your assistant's knowledge base. As models get smarter, the information you've organized, your procedures, your preferences, your business context becomes even more valuable. A better model working with good information produces dramatically better results than a better model working from scratch. Third, revisit your trust boundaries periodically. Tasks you gated behind approval a while back might be safe to automate today because the model is more reliable or because you've built better safeguards. The trust ladder isn't static. It should evolve as the technology and your experience grow. The people who'll get the most from AI assistants in the coming years are the ones who start building that foundation now. You've taken this course, which means you have the framework. The specific tools will evolve. The principles, clear communication, structured knowledge, appropriate trust, human oversight, won't.
You made it. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge something. Most people who talk about AI haven't actually used it to run a business. They've tried a chatbot, maybe written a few prompts, and moved on. You now know more about working with an AI assistant than the vast majority of people giving advice about it on the internet. Let me recap what you've learned. You understand how AI assistants think, and more importantly, how they fail. You know how to set one up with your preferences, your knowledge, and your procedures. You know how to delegate effectively, build automation with appropriate guardrails, and manage the real-world concerns around trust, cost, and privacy. That's a practical skill set, not theory, not hype. A working framework you can apply starting today. Here's my honest assessment of where this leaves you. If you already have access to an AI assistant through ChatGPT, Claude, or any other platform, you can start applying these principles immediately. Set up your preferences, build your knowledge base. Start with that first low-risk task and work your way up the trust ladder. The concepts in this course work regardless of which AI tool you're using. The specifics of how you set things up will vary, but the principles of delegation, memory management, automation, and trust, those are universal.
Now, some of you are probably wondering about the specific setup I've been describing throughout this course. The persistent assistant that remembers everything, runs scheduled tasks, manages subagents, and handles all those automated workflows. That runs on an open source platform called OpenClaw. If you want to build that kind of setup for yourself, your own AI assistant running on your own server, fully under your control, I have a separate course called Easy OpenClaw that walks you through the entire process. It covers installation, configuration, connecting to messaging platforms, setting up automation, and everything else you need to go from zero to a working system. I'll include a link in the course resources. But that's entirely optional. You don't need a custom setup to benefit from what you've learned here. The principles work anywhere. What matters most is that you start. Pick one task this week. Delegate it. See what happens. Build from there. Thank you for spending this time with me. I've genuinely enjoyed sharing what I've learned, and I hope it saves you some of the trial and error I went through. Now, go put your assistant to work.